Here's my crowd. Hand it over to my camera person again. Yes, thank you for having me again. Give you a little speech. This is going to be my persuasive speech. It'll be about the Second Amendment and its relevance to today in society. I got just a little bit of a different setup here for you guys today. I'm going to be using a PowerPoint presentation to kind of help me guide me through my topic here. But we're going to be beginning just with a little bit of a statistic from the FBI. According to, Business Insider, there were 307 mass shootings from January 2018 to November 8th, which is just a little bit out of date, but this is the best information that I can actually find. This display here just kind of shows you where all the instances of a mass shooting has happened. Now, mind you, what the FBI defines as a mass shooting is if there's 4 victims and a shooter. Mind you, not all of these were people that were killed. Some of them were ones that were injured. Mind you, had to have been more than 2 that were injured, and the shooter was also included in most of those statistics. So this is where at least 2 or more people were shot. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were killed. It's just how they define it as a mass shooting. We'll be moving back into why this is important to me. Is the reason why you guys are all here is that if you're not convinced at this point in your life of how important the Second Amendment is, maybe you will be just a little bit more after this. The biggest thing for me is my family, which is all of you guys, my children, my grandparents, my kids. There's just so much that, it affects us that we don't really think about in terms of how we react to a given situation, especially when it's violent in nature. Something that we hardly ever talk about anymore is the reasons why. And I'm going to be giving you the 3 reasons for me on why the Second Amendment is so very important. The first one we have is what I call the Minuteman topic. It's just the everyday people such as yourselves, people that aren't military. They're not peace officers. They're not people that have any type of military background, but they're ready at a minute's notice. The other is self-defense, and it's for a lady that might be pregnant and has no way to defend herself. And then there's, of course, the sporting and recreation and the hunting aspect of it, which some of you hunt, some of you shoot recreationally. But, it's just a reminder of all the other things that come into the Second Amendment that people don't really talk about much anymore. The first one, again, we're going to be going over the Minutemen, the everyday people. Of course, their credo when they first started was that they had to be ready in a minute's notice. And mind you, that's why they call them the Minutemen. And it goes back to the early colonial days where everyday farmers had to be ready to take up that mantle for the military because there wasn't a really good military at the time to help the citizens out. The civilian militia, mainly males from 16 to 60. Now, mind you, that included anybody that, like I said, the 60-year-olds and the elderly. Anybody who was able-bodied would be considered what they would have as a Minuteman. Of course, now the Minutemen were come and gone. It ended in 1916 when the government actually established the National Guard, which kind of brings up what's the need for a modern-day Minuteman. What doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be a quote-unquote military Minuteman. It could be anybody from your neighbor to your friends, just anybody that's ready at a minute's notice to defend you and your rights at any given moment. It could be somebody that's sitting in a grocery store and they need assistance. That's a Minuteman. You're ready in that minute to be there for them. And what people don't really talk about is a preparation for a war, an invasion, if you will, coming into our country. Mind you, the National Guard is here. And our military is one of the biggest in the country, in the nation, in the world, that it's the biggest military in the world. But not all of our military is actually here in the continental United States. They're divided up over many countries over the entire world. So there's not exactly a huge military. So if we're ever invaded, all those people aren't here to protect us. Now, mind you, the National Guard might only be able to go to certain places, so it's up to you in case something ever happens in our country that you're there to defend your country to the best of your ability. And that's where I come into the Red Dawn effect. Everybody's seen that movie. It's just a real hypothetical situation where you're invaded by communist forces. But it's a very good idea about how things could happen if things were to hit the fan and you can't protect your family. You're going to have to depend on that Second Amendment, which our country has given us, so you can defend yourself with firearms. Now, mind you, that also coincides with a domestic threat. Let's say you're coming up to, somebody that plans to bomb a library or school shooting or anything of that nature. You got to be ready. Do you have a firearm to protect yourself and the others that are around you? That's a very important thing that in Second Amendment is actually given people, is that if there is a domestic threat, you have the ultimate equalizer, which is a firearm protected by the Second Amendment. And then defending your freedom and your liberty. Mind you, the Second Amendment was written hundreds of years ago. It's there to defend you and your liberty for life. It's not just there so people can own a firearm, or you can go shooting, or you can go hunting. It's there so you can preserve your freedom from tyrants. The government, in many instances, is the tyrant. They're the people that are coming after you, wanting to enslave you. It happened in many, many countries. Communist Russia is a very good example of that. They take the guns and they limit their citizens to be able to defend themselves from the government that's supposed to protect them. So it's just a reminder of how vital it is for everybody to be modern-day Minuteman, to be ready to stand up for the guy next to you. Our next topic, guys, is going to be self-defense. Again, we were going to be reiterating over the mass shootings. There was 307 alone in this year to date. Believe it or not, it's actually down from previous years. It sounds kind of funny, but it really is. Last year alone, there was about 380, and the year before that was about 370. So that's kind of giving you an idea of how many, mass shootings there really are that occur every single year. And the FBI statistics kind of don't give a lot of information. That's the problem with a lot of this, is that some of the information is so bogged down with hypocrisy and bureaucracy that you can't really get a definite answer on a lot of this. Now, most of these mass shootings could have potentially been like a robbery that went bad, but more than 2 people got shot or injured. So that consists of a mass shooting. So what's happening here is that you have so many mass shootings per capita, which, if you really look at it, how many people live in America, and 307 to date, that's really not that many. It's not as many as you would think that there would be. But that's a very good indication on why the Second Amendment is so important. That most of these don't happen because there's probably somebody armed, and there's a fear that somebody will protect themselves if there's a mass shooting. And a lot of these mass shootings have occurred in places where there are no guns allowed. Mind you, those are soft targets, so that's a very easy way for people to get in and do the maximum amount of damage without any threat. And the most of these is where the shooter gives up at the very first sight of anything. As soon as a guy with a gun comes up to him, he surrenders. Oh, I give up. And that's one of the worst things that you come up with the Second Amendment, is that you're caught in that moment and you're waiting for the police to arrive when you could have had that right to defend yourself all along. That's why the Second Amendment is so important. Another part of this is home invasions. There were 1.3 million home invasions in 2016, according to the FBI. That is a lot of home invasions. Now, mind you, this is instances where maybe 1 person was home or 5 people were home. But in any case, there's always somebody that was at home. If not, they would constitute that as a robbery. Now, robberies encompass something different, but home invasions where a person was actually home. And, in 2016, according to the FBI, there were somewhere in the neighborhood about 100,000 where the people actually defended themselves and kept themselves from, having bodily harm done to them. And there was a fraction of those are actually performed using a firearm. And you probably heard of some of the instances where, even kids have been using a firearm to defend themselves against burglars or home invaders. And that's another point why the Second Amendment is so important, that we have that ability to protect ourselves from people who are willing to do us harm. Another part is the robberies, which, like I said, go into a different statistic than the home invasions and the mass shootings. These are the ones where people are just, maybe going to the grocery store and they're coming back out and it's dark at night and somebody's trying to mug them or trying to steal them or trying to do even worse, maybe murder them and steal their property. That's why it's important, again, for that Second Amendment to be there so you can protect yourself and keep yourself from incurring any bodily harm that occurs. There's something really relevant to us, is that something that we heard about. It was about a lady that was shopping for groceries about 7 o'clock at night, and a guy tried to carjack her and actually shot her. She was completely defenseless, didn't have any way to protect herself. This is another good reason why the Second Amendment is so important to the everyday citizen, that you can protect yourself. My third topic here, we're going to be talking about sports and recreation and hunting. One of the greatest things about the Second Amendment is that it gives you an ability to depict many different facets of firearms. Some of us have shot, some of us don't. But the whole idea is that it's not just the gun. It's how precise you are, how fast you can be with shooting that gun. Some of the guys that I've talked about, in my personal life for marksmanship, is Jerry Mitchell. He's the fastest shooter ever and holds the world record for a revolver. He shot 8 rounds in 1 second. Now, mind you guys, that's not an autoloader, that's a revolver. It's an antiquated, handgun from, the Western days. And this guy's shooting 8 rounds in 1 second. It's not about the firearm, it's about how well you use that firearm. And that's why it's important for everyday citizens to be able to train and use that firearm in the best ability they can. Now, mind you, this is a sports shooter. This is just something he goes and he teaches military on how to shoot, because they're not as fast as him. He is civilian. So that's why it's important for the everyday civilian to have those things available to you, because you could actually be the person that's the most knowledgeable one to give that kind of expertise. Another lady that she's an Olympic gold medalist named Kim Rode. She probably is one of the most unheard of gold medalists ever. She's a skeet shooter. She's won 3 gold medals and 6 national championships. Again, it's a woman that's using a firearm to better herself in her life, which is something that, again, would not be available if the Second Amendment was not here, part of our Constitution. So it's something that's very, very important for you to consider. It's not just men, it's women too that utilize the Second Amendment to further themselves as far as, accomplishing something great. Another part is hunting. Now, mind you, we're not hunters and gatherers anymore, but we still forage for our own food, especially during hunting season. A lot of us have been out hunting. We do process our own meats and everything. That's very important that you keep that up, because not always is there going to be hamburger meat at the grocery store. You're going to have to be able to go out there and hunt your own animals and to process that. That's a very big part of why the frontier days were so much harder than they needed, because they didn't have the firearms readily available like we do today. The Constitution wasn't implemented then, and firearms were hard to get. So now that we do have firearms, it's so much easier for you to actually go and learn how to hunt, get licensed, and use that as part of your whole life, and learning to forage for your family and for yourself. Again, guys, that was just a little speech on the Second Amendment, and it's just very relevant for me these days, and I hope it is for you too. The Second Amendment is key to the survival of our nation and the well-being. Not only are firearms needed for self-defense, but they're also the defense of our nation with the Minutemen, also for the survival of hunting and the ability to forage for their own food. I strongly believe that all American citizens have the right to bear arms, especially in the climate we live in today. Not only domestically, but internationally as well. We must all adapt, equip, train, and prepare ourselves, and not only need to defend ourselves, but our loved ones in our country. And a good quote that I always like is that the only way that the evil can prevail is if good men do nothing. And that's just something to think about when you're thinking about how to protect your Second Amendment. All right, thank you guys very much.
Well, that's longer than